Thanks, everybody. Thanks. I'm not going to keep you any much longer, but I would like to introduce, as our last speaker, the chair of the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, Dr. Eric Schmidt. And just one last note, on your way out, you can grab a book of our final report. It's to the left, I believe, but please don't go home without taking a copy of our final report. Thank you, and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Illy. I was going to do a little contest with you and throw this to you, but I'm concerned about workplace insurance at the hotel. To say that well, first place, I want to thank everybody here for staying, and often people don't stay to the end, and I know this means you guys are really committed. And those of you on the live stream, similarly, thank you very much for a whole day of your attention. Your time is valuable. To say that I am personally proud of this work is an understatement. It starts with having a vice chairman who is exceptional, Bob. The commissioners picked through a random process of the Capitol turned out to be great, shockingly. And every single one of them added extraordinary value. I see Gilman's over here, I saw Safra over here, Katerina was here, and a whole bunch of people here, and those of you who did it online. But the real credit, of course, goes to the staff. We take the credit, they do the work, right? So let's give them some credit for this. And the staff, of course, was organized by Illy, and Illy had this interesting idea that not only should we write down what we thought, which we did, but we would have 100 pages of legislation that they could just pass. An idea that had never occurred to me before, but is actually working. So in the NDAA and a number of the other initiatives, including this strangely named Usica, is this like a new kind of fragrance or something? This sort of, I'm going to call it the Endless Frontiers Act, modified by $200 billion. All of that, right, was essentially enabled by the work of the staff. And we don't talk much about our secret work, but there's an analogous team that worked on the secret stuff. They went through the secret process that has had similar impact. So when I look at today, I think we had more than 40 presenters, and our goal, of course, was global, and it was indeed global. And I think what I would conclude and offer to you is that and by the way, I wanted to thank Secretary Blinken. I particularly wanted to thank him for the 6 pillars, because I'm going to offer 7. It's clear to me that the democratic world must define the standards and norms governing the development and use of AI and emerging technologies, address common platforms, and shape the platforms of tomorrow. And Secretary Blinken said strong networks. And he said strong networks a number of times. And one of the ways to understand how are we going to win is we're going to build strong networks of volunteers who have the same views as we do, who care passionately about this in the democratic world. And the democratic world is not defined as just the US, sorry. It's like all these other countries. And they are, in my view, somewhat disorganized. And part of the reason that we wanted to do this was to essentially get our message out to them, and I would say it was very successful. So I think the message that I wanted to say is this message about strategic competition, people seem to sort of forget. So when I sit around and I watch TV and listen to the dialogue in the US, people forget that we have a new strategic competitor. So President Biden said that the United States is in a long-term strategic competition with China. And the president's right. And that means we actually have to change some of the things and ways in which we operate in order to do that. And this is not just about the US, it's about the sum of the democratic world and the values of the democratic world. And Bob taught me, always say democratic values, right? Just say it over and over and over again. Because somehow we take it for granted in our narrative, but there's an alternative model using technology which is not consistent with our democratic values. And I personally, and I suspect 100% of you agree, the democratic values are messy, but better, right? Let's just agree, it's a better choice. So China has now become a peer technology competitor. And as I said on stage earlier, I spent the last 3 years pontificating my view of where the US was versus China. And I said, well, you know, China's a few years behind. The evidence is that the massive investment, clear focus, clear leadership from the top, a different organizational system, and very, very smart people is producing outcomes that are in the ballpark of the world that we're covering today, which is the world we talked about all day. So if there's any confusion now, right, we'll talk to you afterwards. The data is very, very clear. It's a new world, strategic competition, and the competitors are caught up. Now you can ask, what should we do? Well, that's what the rest of my talk is about. But the important point is, I need you guys to start by saying, new world, new problem, new facts. We always play the old facts. These are the new facts. We have to go forward based on that. And what we did is in our report, we say that the US and democratic nations are playing catch up in organizing this global tech competition. That's why when the secretary talked about his international tech competition, that's important. We need all the aspects of our government and the other democratic governments to organize themselves around this. And you need to build a broad network of alliances among democratic nations that are rooted in our common values, right? The things we care about. Respect for the rule of law, recognition for fundamental human rights, all the things that we take for granted that aren't so granted for everybody. So to me, it starts with the language of diplomacy, strengthening existing frameworks, exploring new frameworks to build these platforms. Put another way, figure out a way to get the platforms built using democratic values, using the government, the universities, the workers, the businesses, and so forth, and do it throughout the democratic world. Now, it's interesting that, and we heard this from a number of speakers, and I want to emphasize it alike, that there's this sort of libertarian view that, oh, we'll just do our thing, everyone else will do our thing, and it'll sort of work out. And that's sort of been my general view. I don't think it's correct now, because what we see is that the United States must provide leadership. So if we don't provide leadership, the other folks won't provide leadership, but our strategic competitors will, if you see the point. See, so it would be nice to say, oh, it's pretty good here, and we don't really need to do this, plus I don't really like to speak French or whatever it is, and you have some sort of prejudice against this, but in fact, that's not how the world works, right? The way the world really works is the US sets the agenda, and that's what we're trying to do here. Now, another message was about the NSCAI, and I think part of the reason that we're so proud of what we've done is because it was done in a bipartisan way. And so if you look at the messaging from Senator Young, right, Representative Thornberry, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who originated the language which created us, and we're very grateful to her, independent of party affiliation, they all came down on the same solutions, which is what we're talking about. So it is possible here in Washington to pull this off. It takes work, right? And the staff did the work, the commissioners did the work, and it was worth it. So when I think about this, we need to provide leadership globally, and it starts with some judgments in our report. We, for example, say that the nation needs to become AI ready by 2025. The tech industry is AI ready now because we're busy inventing it. The rest of the country is behind, right, for all sorts of reasons which we outline in the report. But for example, we said we need leadership from the White House. If I've learned anything in my years of dealing with the government, it's the government is not run like a tech company. It's run top down. So whether you like it or not, you have to start at the top. You have to get the right words. Either they say it or you write it for them and you make it happen, right? And that's how it really, really works. I think this is so important, and indeed in our report we say that we need a technology competitiveness council led by the Vice President of the United States so we can keep everything together. Otherwise, all the different competing interests will take over. We need a program around talent. We need a program around staying ahead of China at least 2 generations in hardware. There are estimates now that we are significantly ahead of them. There are others that are less ahead, but we assess in our group that we need to stay well ahead for reasons which are kind of obvious involving the importance of hardware and AI. We need to sort of continue our focus on innovation and R&D funding, which indeed has been seized by the current administration. And we need to focus on responsible and ethical development for all the reasons that are obvious. My third message is a message about we can't go it alone. I think there's this belief somehow that this is going to happen without each of us putting our oar in and moving this along. If the democracy is messy, against a focus, a democracy can be very, very focused. A problem can become very, very focused with the kind of innovation that has led the United States so very well. I think that when we look at the things we need to do, we need to strengthen the existing mechanisms. We heard a couple of these with NATO and so forth. The president in his visit in Europe announced some things, and the EU has a similar one. The notion of new structures is also important. The Quad something which I didn't know about a year ago and I guess was just recently invented, has all sorts of implications because we came up with a new mechanism for coordinating the way our Asia partners work, right? That's a good idea, and it needs more structure and it needs to be institutionalized. But if I look at it, I think we need to do a whole bunch of stuff, right? And I sort of decided to call them the 7 pillars, sorry. We need to focus on operating standards and norms, the stuff that we talked about, values. We've talked about facilitating coordinated and joint R&D of AI and digital infrastructure, again, across the democratic world. It's obvious to everyone involved in this that promoting democracy, human rights, and the rule of law is central. This technology can easily be used to help, and it's easily used, as we all know, to hurt the principles that we think. We need to be on the helping side and not the hurting side, and we need to limit the hurting side to the degree the technology allows. We've got to find a way to do data sharing. People talk about data sharing, but when you actually talk to AI scientists, the AI algorithms are really, really interesting, and the data problems are really, really hard, right? So figuring out a way to get data norms, data sharing, data normalization, the ways in which people can access this information is obvious. Now you sit there and you say, okay, I don't really know why this is so important. Let's imagine that if you unified the databases that involve health in Europe and the United States, you could cure cancer. Is that worth it? Yeah. Or Alzheimer's, pick your favorite disease. The fact is that these systems need lots and lots of data, and that data needs to be accessed in ways that are consistent with our values, consistent with our privacy principles, but ultimately allow this to occur. We've got to figure out this balance. Sam talked about this a little bit, about this balance of openness and closedness, excuse the word. With OpenAI, in GPT-2, they delayed the launch of the release of the network because they were trying to figure out what it did. With GPT-3, they put in an API which limits its access. I think that's the future for much of this. We're not going to want to have quite the openness that built my industry, and I think that's an okay outcome for now what is a mature industry. We've talked about talent. There are enormous talent shortages. When I talk to my friends, all they do is talk about how it's always been hard to get talent and now it's impossible to get talent. And by the way to solve this is to create more talent. And one of the ways to create more talent, which we say in the report, is to allow high skills immigration into the United States. One of the best answers to competing in the grand strategic sense with China is that the majority of people would prefer to live in a Western country than in China in the world. So why don't we get them all here, right? And let them found companies, create lots of wealth, have them move the world forward, get themselves established, and pay taxes if that's what you care about. And then this notion of internationalism really needs to be around a digital democracy initiative, right? Democracy needs to have a digital update where the digital systems are consistent with the democratic values, right? We've moved, because of the pandemic and for many other reasons, we live online now. I used to say that, well, just turn the thing off. You don't need to be online. That's not a responsible answer to a critic of my industry and to this technology. It now actually has to reflect our laws and values and so forth. So I think the question here is, what do we do? Where do we go from here? Our commission was appointed and ends in October 1st. We've asked it to not be extended. We want to now take this work, working with our partners and our friends. Many of the people who've worked on this report have now been embedded back into parts of our government where they will serve as the change agents in the ways that you could imagine. But I will say over and over again that this area of competition that we're going to say is going to change our world. Again, going back to Sam's comments, if you think about it, the rate at which this is going to affect us is probably going to outstrip our ability to predict it as a society. So we better continue the focus on understanding what the technology can do, where it's going to win, how we can make sure we can build platforms that are westernized, and how American firms can win in that competition. So put another way, we now know that the uses of AI in all aspects of life will grow and that the pace of innovation will continue to accelerate. Many of the speakers have said this. Let me finish by saying that we need to do whatever it takes to maintain our leadership in the critical industries of the future. This report is all about those critical industries. We show a plan. We think we can pull it off. It's crucial for our country. I cannot thank all of you enough, again, for spending the time on this. As you leave, I want you to remember a word, and that word is together, right? It's the old thing of, if you want to make progress, go together. And I now believe, as much as we celebrate individual leaderships, great founders, great inventors, and so forth, this is a team problem, right? We are all now part of our team, and now you're deputized to go out and add more team members around the causes that we describe. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks to Illy and the whole team. Thanks to Bob and all the commissioners, and thank you all for coming.